The school board meeting room was dead silent. You could cut the tension with a knife. 12 white faces stared across the mahogany table at one man, Bumpy Johnson, the most feared name in Harlem, the untouchable king of the streets. But tonight, he wasn't there to talk business. He wasn't there to collect debts or settle scores. He was there as a father, and that made him more dangerous than ever. "Mr. Johnson," the principal's voice cracked as she slid the expulsion letter across the table. "Your daughter's behavior has become unacceptable." Bumpy picked up the paper. His hands were steady. His face was stone. But everyone in that room could feel the storm building behind those calculating eyes. This wasn't just any student they were kicking out. This was his blood, his legacy, his everything. The principal continued, her confidence growing with each word. "She was caught fighting again, disrespecting teachers. We simply cannot tolerate this kind of violence in our institution." Violence. The word hung in the air like smoke from a pistol. Here was a room full of people who'd built their careers on keeping kids like his daughter out of their precious white schools, lecturing Bumpy Johnson about violence. But Bumpy didn't explode. He didn't threaten. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he did something that would haunt that school board for the rest of their lives. He smiled. "To understand what happened that night, you need to go back to the beginning. Back to when Bumpy Johnson wasn't yet the legend. Back to when he was just Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, a young man who learned early that in this world, respect isn't given, it's taken." Bumpy had built his empire on 3 simple rules: loyalty above all, never show weakness, and family comes first. Always. His daughter Elise was everything to him, too. Smart as a whip, fierce as a wildcat, and beautiful enough to stop traffic on 125th Street. But she had fire in her belly, just like her old man. And in 1950s America, a young black girl with fire was considered dangerous. The trouble started when Elise refused to sit in the back of her classroom. Then she talked back to a teacher who called her uppity. Then she fought 3 white girls who tried to cut her hair in the bathroom. Each incident was carefully documented. Each suspension was strategically planned. They weren't just trying to expel one student. They were trying to send a message to every black family in Harlem: know your place. But they picked the wrong father to mess with. Bumpy had been watching, waiting, learning their game. He knew about Principal Margaret Thompson's gambling debts. He knew about School Board Chairman William Porter's weekend visits to the brothels downtown. He knew about Superintendent Harold Matthews' creative accounting with the building fund. He knew everything, because Bumpy Johnson didn't just control the streets of Harlem. He controlled the information that flowed through them. And information, as any smart man knows, is power. Now sitting in that boardroom watching these people try to destroy his daughter's future, Bumpy felt that familiar calm wash over him. The same calm he felt before every calculated move. The same calm that had made him legendary. "You know," Bumpy said, his voice so quiet they had to lean forward to hear him. "My daughter told me something interesting about this school." The principal shifted uncomfortably. The board members exchanged nervous glances. They'd expected anger. They'd expected threats. They'd expected the savage they'd read about in the newspapers. They hadn't expected this. This quiet intelligence. This measured control. Bumpy reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately. Half the room flinched, but he only pulled out a manila envelope. Thick, heavy, full of secrets that could end careers and destroy families. "She told me about the special attention she's been getting, about how certain teachers seem very invested in making sure she fails." He placed the envelope on the table but didn't open it. Not yet. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Outside, Harlem hummed with its usual energy. Inside this room, time seemed frozen. 12 of the city's most powerful education officials sat across from one man who'd climbed from nothing to rule an empire built on loyalty, fear, and perfect timing. "My daughter," Bumpy continued, "might be young, but she's observant. Real observant. Amazing what a child notices when adults think she's not paying attention." Principal Thompson's face had gone pale. Her gambling problem wasn't exactly public knowledge yet. "Now," Bumpy said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man holding all the cards. "I could handle this situation the way the streets would expect me to. The way your newspapers say I handle problems." The threat hung in the air without being spoken. Everyone in that room knew Bumpy Johnson's reputation. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed him. "But I'm not here as the man you read about in those crime stories. I'm here as a father, and a father handles things differently." He tapped the envelope once. Just once. "So let me ask you something. Are we going to have a civilized conversation about my daughter's future? Or are we going to play games?" The principal opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because in that moment, she realized something terrifying. They hadn't called Bumpy Johnson to their meeting. He had manipulated them into calling him. This whole expulsion hearing, this whole charade. It was exactly what he'd been waiting for. But what exactly was he planning? The envelope sat on the polished mahogany table like a loaded gun. Principal Thompson's eyes kept darting to it, then back to Bumpy's face, searching for any hint of what was coming. But Bumpy Johnson had perfected the art of the poker face decades ago on the streets of Harlem. His expression revealed nothing. "Mr. Johnson," Chairman Porter finally spoke, his voice carrying the arrogance of a man who'd spent his entire life believing his position made him untouchable. "I think you misunderstand the situation here. This isn't a negotiation. Your daughter has violated our code of conduct repeatedly. The decision has been made." Porter leaned forward. His fat fingers drummed against the table. "Perhaps in your neighborhood, things work differently. But here we follow proper procedures, legal procedures." The other board members nodded in agreement. They were feeling confident now. Safety in numbers. The power of their positions. The weight of the system behind them. They had no idea they were staring into the eyes of a man who had dismantled bigger empires than theirs. "Legal procedures," Bumpy repeated slowly, tasting the words like fine wine. "Interesting choice of words, Mr. Porter." But Porter wasn't done. He was on a roll now, drunk on his own authority. "Your daughter is a disruptive influence, violent, aggressive. Frankly, she doesn't belong in an institution of learning. Maybe she'd be more suited to other environments." The racial undertone wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Superintendent Matthews joined in, his voice dripping with condescension. "We've been more than patient, Mr. Johnson. More than fair. But there comes a time when we have to think about the safety and well-being of our other students. The good students. Good students, translation, white students." Principal Thompson found her voice again. "Your daughter started 3 separate altercations this month alone. She refuses to respect authority. She questions everything. She paused, searching for the right word. Uncontrollable. Uncontrollable. There was that word again. The same word they'd used to describe Bumpy himself when he first started making waves in Harlem. When he refused to bow down to the Italian families who thought they owned everything. When he dared to believe that a black man could build something lasting in a world designed to tear him down. But Bumpy didn't interrupt. He let them talk. Let them reveal exactly who they were. Let them dig their own graves with every arrogant word. "We have standards here," Porter continued, puffing up like a peacock. "Standards that have served this institution well for over 50 years. We can't make exceptions regardless of who the parent might be." The threat was clear. They knew exactly who Bumpy Johnson was, they knew his reputation, and they were telling him it didn't matter, that their little kingdom of education was beyond his reach. They thought wrong. 50 years, Bumpy said quietly. That's a long time to build something. A long time to establish trust with the community. A long time to build relationships with parents, with donors, with the people who really matter. He paused, letting his words sink in. Must be scary to think about losing all that overnight. The confidence in the room wavered slightly. Just a crack. But Bumpy saw it. Matthews tried to regain control. "Is that a threat, Mr. Johnson? Because if it is, I should remind you that threatening school officials is a serious crime. We have connections with the police department, the mayor's office, the mayor's office, Bumpy interrupted, his first sign of amusement all evening. Harold Matthews, you want to bring up the mayor's office? Something in his tone made Matthews stop mid-sentence. See, that's interesting, Harold. Can I call you Harold? We're all friends here, right? Bumpy's smile was razor-sharp. Because I was just thinking about Mayor Wagner, about his re-election campaign, about how important the Harlem vote is going to be this year. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Now, I don't get involved in politics much, not directly, but I do know people. I know which way the wind blows in my neighborhood, and I know that when word gets out about how this school treats black children. He let the sentence hang unfinished. Porter tried to bluster. You can't intimidate us with political pressure. We answer to the State Board of Education, not to local politicians. The State Board? Bumpy nodded thoughtfully. Governor Harriman's people. Yeah, I know about them too. Interesting thing about state politics, William. Can I call you William? Everything's connected. The governor needs the city needs the voters. And the voters, well, they need to trust their schools. Principal Thompson was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The gambling debts Bumpy knew about weren't just any gambling debts. They were debts to people who answered to him. People who would do whatever Bumpy asked, whenever he asked it. But he wasn't ready to play that card yet. Here's what I find fascinating about this whole situation, Bumpy continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. You're so focused on my daughter's behavior, you haven't asked the important question. Which is? Matthews asked, though he looked like he didn't really want to know. Which is why my daughter was fighting in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. See, Elise told me something interesting. She told me about the names she gets called. The things that happen when the teachers aren't looking. The special treatment she receives from certain staff members who seem very invested in making sure she fails. Bumpy reached for the envelope again, his fingers tracing the edge. She told me about how her homework assignments get lost, how her test scores get marked down for mysterious attitude problems, how certain teachers seem to have very strong opinions about what happens to little black girls who don't know their place. Principal Thompson's face had gone from pale to green. But here's the thing that really bothers me, Bumpy said, finally opening the envelope. It's not just my daughter this is happening to. Is it, Margaret? The use of her first name hit like a physical blow. This wasn't random, this wasn't coincidence. He knew. Somehow, he knew everything. Bumpy pulled out a single photograph from the envelope. He didn't show it to anyone else. He just looked at it, nodded, and put it face down on the table. You know what I think happened here, he said. I think you people got comfortable. I think you forgot that every child has someone who loves them, someone who protects them, someone who notices when they're being hurt. The board members were all staring at that face-down photograph like it was a snake ready to strike. I think you forgot that in Harlem, family isn't just blood. It's community. And when you mess with one of our children, you mess with all of us. Bumpy stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. The simple movement seemed to fill the entire room. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to reverse my daughter's expulsion. You're going to make sure she gets the education she deserves. And you're going to take a real close look at how you treat all the children in this school. Porter tried one last act of defiance. And if we don't? What exactly are you going to do about it? Bumpy smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. William, you're thinking like an amateur. You're thinking about what I might do to you, but you should be thinking about what I don't have to do. He tapped the photograph once. Because the thing about truth is, it has a way of coming out, and when it does, well, let's just say your 50 years of reputation can disappear a lot faster than it took to build. The room was dead silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the distant sound of traffic outside. The collective held breath of 12 people who were just beginning to understand they'd picked a fight with the wrong man. But Bumpy wasn't done. Not even close. Because what they didn't know yet was that the photograph was just the beginning. The face-down photograph sat between them like a loaded weapon waiting to explode. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. He was a chess player in a world full of checkers players. And chess players know that the most devastating moves come from patience. You know what your problem is? Bumpy said, settling back into his chair like a man who had all the time in the world. You think power comes from position, from titles, from the ability to push people around. He gestured around the room, taking in the expensive wood paneling, the portraits of dead white men on the walls, the American flag standing in the corner like a silent witness to decades of injustice. But real power comes from understanding people, from knowing what they need, what they fear, what they'll do anything to protect. Principal Thompson was sweating now despite the air conditioning. The gambling debts weren't her only secret. There were other things that could destroy more than just her career. Take you, Margaret, Bumpy continued, his voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. Smart woman, dedicated educator. But you've got some expensive habits, don't you? Thompson's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. See, the thing about gambling is, it's never just about the money. It's about the thrill, the rush, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this time you'll beat the odds. Bumpy pulled another photograph from the envelope. This one he held up briefly, just long enough for Thompson to see herself entering Mickey's underground poker room on 127th Street. Her face went white as a sheet. But the house always wins, doesn't it, Margaret? And when you can't pay your debts to Mickey's people, well, let's just say they get creative about collecting. He put the photograph face down next to the first one. Now, Mickey's a reasonable man. He understands that sometimes good people make bad choices, but his investors? They're not as understanding. They want their money, and they don't much care how they get it. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every board member was wondering what else was in that envelope, what other secrets this man from Harlem had somehow uncovered. But Bumpy was just getting started. Harold, he said, turning his attention to Superintendent Matthews. Tell me something. How's your wife doing these days? Matthews went rigid. What? What does my wife have to do with anything? Beautiful woman. Met her at a charity function last year. Real classy lady. The kind of woman who believes in doing the right thing, who believes her husband shares those values. Another photograph emerged from the envelope. Matthews could see his own face staring back at him, but he couldn't make out the details from across the table. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it showed. Interesting thing about charity functions, Bumpy continued conversationally. All those wealthy people all in one place talking about helping the less fortunate. But funny thing is, the money doesn't always make it to where it's supposed to go, does it? Matthews's face was a mask of barely controlled panic. The building fund. Somehow this street criminal knew about the building fund. See, I have this friend who works in accounting, very detail-oriented woman. Noticed some interesting patterns in how certain funds get allocated, how money meant for books and supplies somehow ends up elsewhere. Bumpy placed Matthew's photograph face down with the others. The collection was growing. Now, I'm not an educated man like you folks, he said with mock humility. I never went to fancy schools or got degrees in administration, but I do understand numbers. And these numbers, they don't add up. William Porter was sweating bullets now. If this man had dirt on Thompson and Matthews, what did he have on him? William, Bumpy said, as if reading his mind. You're wondering what I know about you, aren't you? Porter tried to maintain his composure. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Johnson, but... Game? Bumpy interrupted, his voice sharp as a razor. You think this is a game? For the first time all evening, real anger flashed in his eyes. Not the explosive rage they'd expected, but something far more dangerous. Cold fury. Calculated wrath. My daughter comes home crying because some teacher called her an animal, because some administrator told her she'd never amount to anything, because the system you people run is designed to break children who look like her. He stood up slowly, his hands flat on the table. And you call this a game? The room felt like it was shrinking. 12 powerful people suddenly felt very small in the presence of this one man who'd built an empire on the principle that respect is earned, not given. But you're right about one thing, William. This is strategic. Because I learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with bullies is to speak their language. Bumpy reached into his jacket again. More photographs, more secrets, more ammunition. See, while you people were busy trying to destroy my daughter, I was busy learning about all of you. About your families, your businesses, your dirty little secrets. He spread the photographs out like a poker hand, all face down. Margaret's gambling debts, Harold's creative accounting, William's weekend activities that his wife doesn't know about. Should I go on? The board members were looking at each other with pure terror now. They'd expected to face a street thug. Instead, they were staring into the eyes of a master strategist who'd outplayed them at every turn. Here's what's going to happen, Bumpy said, his voice returning to that dangerous calm. You're going to reverse my daughter's expulsion. Tonight. You're going to implement new policies to ensure fair treatment of all students. And you're going to make sure every teacher and administrator in this building understands that discrimination has consequences. Porter made one last desperate attempt to regain control. You can't blackmail us into... Blackmail? Bumpy's laugh was cold as winter wind. William, you still don't get it, do you? He picked up one of the face-down photographs, Porter's photograph, and held it between two fingers. This isn't blackmail. Blackmail is when someone threatens to reveal information unless you pay them. This is justice. He set the photograph down without revealing it. See, I'm not asking you to pay me anything. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to do your jobs, to treat all children with respect, to be the educators you claim to be. Bumpy walked around the table slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. But if you can't do that, if you choose to keep hurting children, then yes, these photographs are going to find their way to some very interested parties. He stopped behind Principal Thompson's chair. The State Board of Education would be very interested in Margaret's financial situation. The FBI would be fascinated by Harold's creative accounting. And William. Well, let's just say there are several newspapers that would pay good money for a story about corruption in the school system. The trap was complete. Perfect. Inescapable. So what's it going to be? Bumpy asked, returning to his seat. Are we going to work together to make sure all children get a fair education? Or am I going to have to find other people to have this conversation with? The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Principal Thompson cleared her throat. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, perhaps we were hasty in our decision regarding your daughter. Perhaps? Bumpy's eyebrow arched dangerously. We were wrong, she corrected quickly. We'll reverse the expulsion immediately and we'll review our policies to ensure fair treatment for all students. One by one, the other board members nodded their agreement. They had no choice. Bumpy Johnson had outmaneuvered them completely, but as they watched him gather up his photographs, sliding them back into that manila envelope, they all had the same terrifying thought. If he could do this to them, if he could walk into their sanctuary and dismantle their power so completely, what else was he capable of? And more importantly, was this really over? The meeting room had transformed into a battlefield where words were weapons and silence was surrender. 12 of the city's most powerful education officials sat frozen as Bumpy Johnson methodically dismantled their world, piece by calculated piece. But William Porter wasn't done fighting. Desperation makes men dangerous, and Porter was drowning in it. You think you've won something here? Porter snarled, his composure finally cracking. You think walking into our meeting with your street corner intimidation tactics makes you powerful? He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. I've been dealing with criminals like you for 30 years, Johnson. Thugs who think fear makes them kings. But you're in my world now, and in my world, there are rules. Porter reached for the phone on the conference table. One call to Commissioner Murphy and you'll be in handcuffs before you reach the lobby. One call to the district attorney and those photographs of yours become evidence in a blackmail case. The other board members watched in horror as Porter dialed. This was escalating beyond their worst nightmares. But Bumpy? Bumpy just smiled. "Make your call, William," he said calmly. "But before you do, maybe you should know who's going to answer." Porter's finger hesitated over the final digit. "See, the funny thing about having connections in this city," Bumpy continued, "is that everybody's connected to somebody, and everybody owes somebody a favor." He reached into his jacket one more time, not for photographs this time, for a small tape recorder. Old-fashioned, reliable, the kind private investigators used when they needed evidence that would hold up in court. "Commissioner Murphy," Bumpy said thoughtfully. "Good man, honest cop, the kind of man who really cares about protecting children, especially when those children are being hurt by people in positions of trust." He placed the tape recorder on the table and pressed play. Porter's own voice filled the room. "Your daughter is a disruptive influence, violent, aggressive. Frankly, she doesn't belong in an institution of learning. Maybe she'd be more suited to other environments. Every racist word, every condescending tone, every moment of their arrogance captured in crystal clear audio. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part came next. Matthews's voice. We can't make exceptions, regardless of who the parent might be. Thompson's voice. She refuses to respect authority. She questions everything. She's uncontrollable. And then Porter again. Perhaps in your neighborhood, things work differently. But here, we follow proper procedures. The tape kept playing. 5 minutes of pure, undeniable evidence of systematic discrimination. Of educators who had forgotten their oath to serve all children equally. Porter's hand fell away from the phone like it had caught fire. "Now," Bumpy said, turning off the recorder. "You were saying something about making a call?" The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic, the collective sound of 12 careers hanging by a thread. But Bumpy wasn't finished. He never was until the lesson was complete. "See, William, you made the same mistake everyone makes when they first meet me. You confused quiet with weak. You confused calm with stupid. You confused patience with powerlessness." He stood up slowly, commanding the room without raising his voice. "But the real mistake you made was forgetting that I didn't build what I built by accident. I didn't survive what I survived by luck. And I damn sure didn't become who I became by letting people hurt my family." Bumpy picked up the tape recorder and held it like a grenade with the pin pulled. "This recording is going to the commissioner, not as a threat, not as blackmail, but as evidence of discrimination against a child. My child." Principal Thompson tried one last desperate gambit. "Mr. Johnson, surely we can work something out. There's no need to involve the authorities. We've already agreed to reverse the expulsion." "Margaret," Bumpy interrupted, his voice colder than a Harlem winter. "You still don't understand. This was never about just my daughter." He gestured to the photograph still lying face down on the table. "Every parent in Harlem deserves to know what kind of people are educating their children. Every taxpayer in this city deserves to know how their money is being spent. Every voter deserves to know what their elected school board really thinks about black kids." The trap wasn't just perfect, it was educational. "But here's what's going to happen," Bumpy continued. "Because I'm not just a father, I'm not just a businessman. I'm a man who believes in justice." He pointed at each board member in turn. "Margaret, you're going to get help for your gambling problem, the kind of help that comes with supervision and accountability. Harold, you're going to return every penny you've stolen from the building fund with interest. William, you're going to resign your position and find a new line of work, something that doesn't involve children." The room felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, but Bumpy's voice remained steady, surgical, precise. "And all of you are going to support a new policy requiring cultural sensitivity training for every educator in the system. You're going to implement oversight committees with community representation. You're going to make sure this never happens again to any child." Porter made one final desperate play. "You can't force us to—" "Force you?" Bumpy's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "William, I'm not forcing you to do anything, I'm giving you a choice." He picked up one of the photographs, Porter's photograph, and slowly, deliberately, turned it face up. The image was grainy but unmistakable, Porter in a downtown hotel room with a woman who definitely wasn't his wife. Money changing hands. The kind of transaction that would end more than just a marriage. Porter's face went from red to white to green in the span of 3 seconds. Choice number 1, Bumpy said conversationally. You do the right thing. You clean up this school system. You treat all children with respect. You become the educators you pretended to be. He turned over another photograph. Matthews with his hands in the cookie jar, literally counting money that should have gone to student programs. Choice number 2, Bumpy continued. This recording goes to every newspaper in the city. These photographs go to every law enforcement agency in the state, and your families get to read about your extracurricular activities in the morning paper. One by one, he turned over all the photographs. A full house of corruption, discrimination, and hypocrisy laid bare on the conference table. So what's it going to be? Bumpy asked, settling back into his chair like a king on his throne. Redemption or destruction? The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, Principal Thompson spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What? What do you want us to do? Bumpy smiled. Not the cold, dangerous smile from before. Something different, something that almost looked like hope. I want you to be better, he said simply. I want you to remember why you became educators in the first place. I want you to look at every child who walks through those doors and see potential instead of problems. He gathered up the photographs and the tape recorder, sliding them back into the envelope. My daughter is going to graduate from this school with honors. She's going to go to college. She's going to become something amazing. And when she does, it's going to be because someone finally saw her for who she really is. Bumpy stood up and adjusted his tie, the simple gesture somehow final and absolute. But if any of you ever, and I mean ever, try to hurt another child the way you tried to hurt mine. He left the sentence unfinished. He didn't need to complete it. The message was crystal clear. As Bumpy walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at the 12 broken people sitting around that conference table. Oh, and one more thing, he said with that dangerous smile. If you think this story ends here, you haven't been paying attention. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like thunder. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that this meeting was just the beginning of something much bigger than one man's fight for his daughter's future. Because Bumpy Johnson had just declared war on an entire system. And when Bumpy Johnson went to war, he didn't just win. He changed the game forever. 3 months after that boardroom confrontation, Principal Margaret Thompson cleaned out her desk for the last time. The gambling addiction treatment program Bumpy had suggested was working, but her career in education was over. The state board had been very clear about that. She packed her personal photos, her teaching awards, her 30 years of service certificates. All meaningless now. All reduced to footnotes in a story about corruption and discrimination that would follow her forever. But Thompson wasn't the only casualty. Superintendent Harold Matthews had returned every stolen penny to the building fund, plus interest. The FBI investigation that followed revealed a pattern of embezzlement going back 7 years. He'd avoided prison, but his reputation was destroyed. His wife had filed for divorce, his children wouldn't speak to him. And William Porter, he'd resigned in disgrace 2 weeks after the meeting. The photographs Bumpy had shown him found their way to his wife anyway. Some secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how carefully they're buried. The school board had been completely restructured. New faces, new policies, new oversight from the community Bumpy Johnson represented. But the real change wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the classrooms. Teachers who had once looked at black children and saw problems now saw potential. Students who had been written off as difficult were suddenly discovering they were gifted. Test scores in Harlem schools began rising for the first time in decades. Elise Johnson graduated valedictorian 3 years later. Full scholarship to Barnard College, pre-law. She stood at that podium, looking out at an audience that included every member of the new school board, and delivered a speech about justice, dignity, and the power of having someone believe in you. Bumpy sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face, proud as any father had ever been. But the story didn't end there. Because what Bumpy had done that night in the boardroom had consequences far beyond one school, one daughter, one family. Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. The untouchable Kingpin who had taken on the education system and won. The street legend who had used his power not for revenge, but for justice. The father who had shown that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a corrupt system is force it to be fair. Other parents started coming to Bumpy, not for illegal favors, not for street justice, for help navigating a system designed to crush their children's dreams, for someone who understood how to speak power's language fluently enough to make it listen. Bumpy never charged a fee, never asked for anything in return, because he understood something that the old school board never had. True power isn't about what you can take, it's about what you can build. Within 5 years, Harlem had transformed. New community centers, after-school programs, scholarship funds for college-bound students. All of it organized quietly, efficiently, by a man who most people thought was just a criminal. The newspapers still called him the King of Harlem, but now they meant something different by it. Commissioner Murphy, who had received that damning recording, later said it was the most important piece of evidence he'd ever heard, not because it led to arrests, but because it led to change. Real, lasting change that protected thousands of children from the kind of discrimination Elise had faced. Bumpy Johnson taught us something that night, Murphy would say years later in his retirement speech. He taught us that sometimes the people society writes off as villains are the only ones brave enough to be heroes. The old Bumpy might have handled things differently. The young Bumpy, hungry for respect and willing to take it by force, would have chosen violence. But the father in him, the protector of his community, chose something more powerful than fear. He chose justice. And justice, as it turns out, is the most dangerous weapon of all. Margaret Thompson, in her final interview before leaving New York forever, was asked about that night in the boardroom, about facing down the most feared man in Harlem, about what she learned from the experience. "I learned that reputation isn't the same as character," she said quietly. "We thought we were dealing with a criminal. But the truth is, we were the ones breaking the law. We were the ones hurting children. And he was just a father trying to protect his daughter." She paused, looking out the window at the school where she'd spent 3 decades of her life. "People always ask me if I was scared that night, if I thought he was going to hurt us. But looking back, I realized the scariest thing about Bumpy Johnson wasn't his reputation or his power. It was his restraint. It was knowing that he could have destroyed us completely, but he chose to give us a chance to be better." She never worked in education again, but she spent the rest of her life volunteering with at-risk youth, trying to make amends for the children she'd failed. Harold Matthews moved to Florida and opened a small accounting firm. He sent money back to Harlem schools every month for the rest of his life. Anonymous donations that helped fund programs for kids who reminded him of Elise Johnson. William Porter disappeared entirely. Some say he moved to California. Others think he left the country. But everyone agrees on one thing. He learned the hard way that some men shouldn't be underestimated. Today, there's a scholarship at Barnard College named after Elise Johnson. It goes to young women from Harlem who show academic excellence and community leadership. The fund is managed by a foundation that operates quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. The foundation's board includes former students, community leaders, and one carefully anonymous benefactor who prefers to work behind the scenes. Because that's the thing about true legends. They don't need credit, they don't need recognition, they just need results. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, but his legacy lived on in every child who got a fair chance at education, in every teacher who learned to see potential instead of problems, in every parent who realized that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with fists but with principles. The lesson wasn't complicated. It wasn't sophisticated. It was simple as the streets that raised him. Respect is earned, not given. Family comes first, always. And when you have the power to change things for the better, you don't hesitate. You don't compromise. You act. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what the newspapers call you. It doesn't matter what reputation follows you through the streets. What matters is what you do when someone threatens the people you love. What matters is whether you choose fear or justice, whether you choose revenge or redemption, whether you choose to be remembered as a villain or as the man who made sure no other child would suffer like his daughter did. Bumpy Johnson made his choice that night in the boardroom, and Harlem, all of Harlem, was better for it. The game, as he always said, is played by those brave enough to change the rules, and sometimes changing the rules changes everything.